looking back on some of the most memorable guests that I've had on the programme over the last 3.5 years, and one lady, Janis Hetherington, is definitely one of my most memorable guests, who's been part of the show several times. Janis made the headlines when she became the first lesbian here in Britain to conceive by artificial insemination. 41 years ago now, because we had her and her son on when he just turned 40, so you may remember that bit of the story if nothing else. And she's now written a book about her life, and she's come in this afternoon to tell us about it. Good afternoon, Janis.
Hello, Joanne, and what a pleasure it is to come back and see you.
It's always nice to see you, Janis. And also Natalie Drew is with us in the studio from the Fertility Centre. Natalie, we told the story of you and your partner Aisling, sorry, over the years as well. And did you know each other before you started the Gay Fertility Centre?
No, Janis just happened to email me and just said she supported me when the centre first opened, when it hit the headlines. And then we met here at the station last year, and since then we've kept in regular contact and done various interviews.
So I've created a friendship.
You have created the most incredible thing that you cannot believe, because my life story is very controversial, and to share it with someone, and some parts of it are quite murky, some parts of it are lovely, to share it with someone and to know that you can trust them as a friend, and it all happened through you, my dear.
So just in case some of my listeners today haven't been that dedicated and didn't hear you the first time you were on, will you just remind us of your story, please, Janis?
Yes, well, basically I can tell the whole story now, which is that when I was 16 I realised that I was lesbian. I had an affair with a brothel keeper in Paris, and from that period of time I was very aware that I could only really have relationships with women. I had relationships with a lot of women. I ran a brothel in London, which was fairly controversial. I was involved in a lot of court cases, etc. But the one thing I did know is that when I did meet a woman, that there was a possibility that I could be inseminated, because it had been discussed in Paris, had been discussed around my dinner tables in London, and when I did fall in love with someone who had no idea what insemination was, she thought it was for pigs and goats. She had her own 5-year-old daughter. She said, okay, if that's what you want, we can go into it. How do we go about it? And I was inseminated, and I was the first lesbian to be inseminated.
And how did you go about? Because there weren't people like Natalie here helping people with sperm donors and stuff like that via the internet those days, were there? This is more than 40 years ago.
That was the fortunate thing of having my dinner parties and having been involved in brothels and having a clientele that was mainly part of the judiciary and also the medical profession. It was something they talked about the whole time. They talked about it not in the terms of lesbians having children, but, you know, the possibility and whether it would cause a huge furore, because you could then have selective breeding. So that was all part and parcel of the things we talked about. So I had the facility. I then had the love with Judy and the capability, and I had several tests and so on, and eventually I did have a sperm donor who was the doctor who was running the fertility clinic, which was another minefield.
So you actually went to a clinic?
I went to a clinic.
So being Crete, you didn't have to use a turkey baster?
I didn't use a turkey baster. He used a proper facility, if you like, which is unlike a turkey baster, for goodness sake.
And what was the reaction? How old was Nick then? So Nick came along, your lovely son, who's now a very successful businessman. Does he still live in New York?
Yes, he does.
So he's in
New York. And he sent you his love.
Oh, thank you. You're a successful businesswoman in your own right over here. How did it come out? How did people find out?
Well, Judy died when Nicky was just 9 months old. She had a most terrible heart attack at 30. I was then 26. And then I had her daughter, Lisa, who was then only 7 years old. So I had to fight for custody of Lisa. And yeah, it was very hard.
And was it that custody battle then that
it was, yes. And again, well, no, that didn't, because that was always kept under covers. This was in the Strand. This is the family division, and the papers weren't allowed in. But it was when Lisa was 11 and Nikki was 5 years old, we moved back up to London, and there was a huge controversy with a paper called Sappho, who had been conned by a couple of journalists into doing a story about an insemination clinic that they had facility to. And the story was just blasted wide open. Nikki, a wonderful headmistress in Fleet School in London, said, Janis, you have to help your sisters. You have to show that he hasn't got two heads. You have to come out and tell the truth. And of course, that was fine, but what people didn't realise is that I had the ogre on my back. I had all my past, which was running brothels and what I had done beforehand. And the minute that I went public with it, I had people like Janie Jones phone up the press and say, you don't really know what she's like, etc. So
all the linen,
well,
everything was out of the cupboards.
It didn't, because I wouldn't do a story and I wouldn't give a story. I've never taken any money from the press for doing stories.
I mean, then we fast forward 41 years and what you do, Natalie, and you help. Well, explain what the clinic does.
We match make sperm donors with lesbian couples and single women that are...
Now, less controversial today, but still controversial.
Yeah,
Same-sex couples wanting to have children.
Yeah, we still get a lot of attention because of it, and because of the fact that we, you know, our service does cater more for lesbians than it does for the heterosexual population, just because, you know, there's a lot of gay guys out there that want to be dads, and so it's, you know, by us doing this matchmaking service, you know, you're getting a couple and then a father in the process as well, and it's, you know, everybody's matchmaking and coming together and forming these family units.
I mean, stories like this still do get in the papers, but mainly if it's Elton John or, you know, another celebrity, that kind of thing. But there are a lot of people, same-sex couples, having children now.
We still get a lot of coverage about it, you know, just for the fact that it is still controversial, and the fact that, you know, it's moving on. You know, where there are, you know, a lot, like this year we've had a lot of couples that have come along and said, I don't want the child myself, I'd rather my partner have it, and here's my eggs, and, you know, so you get a lot of controversy with that, because obviously there's nothing wrong with the carrying partner's eggs.
Well, people shouting at the radio this afternoon, girls, saying, just because you can doesn't mean it's right.
It's a very difficult conundrum. Just because you have a womb and you have eggs, do you have a right to have a child? The answer must be in your own conscience and with those of your partners or partner. It's the same controversy, if you like, that it's a woman's right to choose whether she has an abortion or not. And of course, there's this terrible thing that is happening in the United States at the moment, and as you know, my son lives in the United States, and he's very much of the collage group, which is people who are basically trying to